Hello, and welcome everyone to the Emancipated Citizen podcast, where we present to you some of the stories of the bravest men and women out there fighting for their freedom, for their individuality, for their rights to expression, to confession, fighting against authoritarianism. Today, I am presenting to you a much-awaited guest on this podcast, a person who very boldly came out with his beliefs on national television and suffered immensely for it, Mohammed Nofal. Mohammed Nofal has been, I guess, a fairly well-known name in the Egyptian former Muslim community, or even the wider critical community in that sense. And this public journey started in a very spectacular way. Mohammed had the idea of presenting his lack of belief in God and I guess trying to represent non-believers in his country on national television before even his community knew in an environment where that was very highly taboo. In 2018, there was an Islamic talk show that sent an open invitation to atheists to come on and discuss their views. Mohammed Nofal had the idea that it would be a good idea to come on and talk about his views with those people, only to be insulted, accused of being mentally ill for not believing in God, and engaged with it in really bad faith. I mean, you can watch the video right here.
انا ملحد، يعني انا مش بصدق في وجود ربنا،
I'm an atheist, which means I don't believe in the existence
انا
of
مش
God.
بصدق في وجود ربنا او
What is
بصدق فيه،
this?
بس ده الالحاد.
I'm an
انا مش
atheist, I
محتاج الدين
don't
عشان
believe in
انا
God.
يبقى عندي اخلاق او ان انا ابقى نافع في المجتمع.
I don't need it for
عشان مفيش
morality
اي
or to be
دليل
a
على
member of
وجود
society.
ربنا، اي
Why
دليل
don't you believe in
مفيش
God?
اي
ازاي مفيش دليل على وجود ربنا؟ انت بتتكلم ازاي؟ يعني مفيش دليل على وجود ربنا؟ مين اللي وجدك انت تكون موجود
What do
هنا
you mean
ازاي
there
ربنا؟
is no? What do you mean there is no evidence for the existence of God? How did you get here? There are theories, many theories. How did you become a human being? How did you become a human being? Okay, let me explain. So there are theories that explain our existence in the universe. We have the Big Bang Theory. Speaking Arabic. Don't use foreign scientific terms. You are a heretic. Your thought is inappropriate. We cannot promote that.
ما ينفعش ان احنا نروج الافكار هي اصلا هدامه. انت ما قلتش ولا كلمه بنقول عندنا مقنعه.
شوف حبيبي،
Look,
هي انت محتاج تتعالج نفسيا.
you have to go to a mental institution. You have serious problems. You cannot be here. He has absolutely nothing convincing, and he is a bad example for the Egyptian youth. And I advise you to go to a mental institution now. Did you expect that when you came on?
Yeah,
There's something absolutely bizarre about this, right? I mean, just looking at it from the perspective of the host there, what are they trying to accomplish there? I mean, it doesn't make them look good either. It's bizarre. It's not to be expected, but at the same time, you do know that it's not an environment that's very friendly to atheists. So, what were you thinking when you took this invitation, and what did you expect out of it?
I'll speak of what I'm thinking right now, and then what I've thought back then. What I think right now is that I would like to thank you for hosting me in the Emancipated Citizen, your podcast.
Thank you very much for being here.
And what I thought back then, during the interview, I was in a total state of shock because I did not really expect this escalation, this sort of escalation of the show. Why I was there? I was there to fight for our freedom in Egypt, freedom of people who are minority, who don't believe in Islam, also freedom for minorities that are being persecuted through Islam. And that was the reason. And for freedom, throughout the history, people lost their lives trying to fight for their freedom. And in Europe, there was also wars that was fought, and people that was persecuted and lost their lives trying to win their freedom back from religious authorities, for example, or so. And without this, we wouldn't have the Western civilization as it is right now. And if I compare the situation right now in the Middle East, I think that is some sort of our dark ages. So we have also to fight for our freedoms. We have to liberate ourselves, and then we can start to build as a healthy, reasonable societies and countries, and adapt values that actually would make us happy, productive, and good, and and be able to contribute something good for the whole world, not only for us.
I mean, touching on the point that you mentioned about us being in the dark ages of the society's history. I mean, you don't even have to go to the Middle Ages to see how different society was, and how people had a lot more free range to talk about important issues like this. You can just go back like 70 years to the mid 20th century, right, and see that you had Egyptian authors like Ismail Adham, who wrote a series of essays with the title "Why I'm an Atheist," published in Egypt. He lived and died in Egypt peacefully. The Saudi Arabian atheist thinker Abdullah Qasimi, after not being able to safely live in Saudi Arabia at the time, actually ended up living in Egypt and living the rest of his life in Egypt. So, I mean, in the mid 20th century, of course, the legacy of Gamal Abdel Nasser and the socialist kind of revolution is very mixed, but there was undoubtedly more enfranchisement for religious minorities, for non-believers, and this, like the reactionary Islamist supremacist movement, has really taken hold since then, and nobody who's not an Orthodox Salafi Muslim can have any say in Egyptian politics nowadays, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, somehow. I mean, for example, if we speak of Azhar, it's a religious authority in Egypt. One could say it's a university. It has schools. It's an institution that brainwash children from childhood until they are adults, and they have like armies that try to intellectually fight any progress in the society. So army of people that and they have political influence, they have authorities, and I think Azhar is one of the big reasons why Egypt is in this difficult situations on almost all levels, not only political but also financial and social, and so that's how I see the situation regarding that, actually.
Would you like to elaborate on the societal influence of Al Azhar and I guess the way in which it has transformed Egyptian society in more recent decades?
Yeah, after the revolution, after we got rid of our no, I will even go before our revolution, getting rid of our king. I would say that Azhar did always exist and did always have an influence, and then this influence might have not been enough, and then the Muslim Brotherhood, did emerge, and I think the emergence of Muslim Brotherhood in 1928 was like an important point in our life in Egypt, and there was always this somehow love-hate relationship between Azhar, that is normally backed by the government, and the Muslim Brotherhoods, and this sort of dynamics did create, I think, waves of Islamizations to the Egyptian society that led to the current situation where in few years Egyptian women went from without hijab to all wearing a hijab, like a decade or so. And I think your country is also to blame, partially, Saudi Arabia, because this Islamic movements were also supported by Saudi Arabia. And some people say now, like, Saudi Arabia started to liberate itself partially, but then we are still stuck many years in the chaos that Wahhabism did create.
Very much so. Very much so, yeah. Would it be kind of a fair assessment to describe it as a sort of a state-controlled clergy, and the Muslim Brotherhood is more of an independent reactionary movement that wants to actually push the government further?
I think what I try to say is that if the Azhar did not exist, the Muslim Brotherhood wouldn't have existed.
You're saying that the prominent figures from the Muslim Brotherhood emerged from the Al-Azhar institution.
Azhar has put the foundation of extremism. Okay, so the small foundations that is being now described as moderate Islam, and then these foundations would be actually manipulated by extremists that are maybe like Muslim Brotherhood or Salafis or so. And if Azhar did not exist, then there is nobody to put this religious foundation that other extremists and jihadist organizations build on. And that's regarding Egypt.
But this assessment of Azhar and its teaching being moderate is very far from
it's being
true.
described as moderate, but it's being far from moderate. Yeah, certainly. And I see professors even in German universities that are from Azhar and teaching in German university Islam or so, and they incorporate these extremist ideologies of Azhar and being sold here in Germany, for example, as moderate Islam. And I see Western people do not understand that. They don't understand the difference. They cannot read between the lines.
If you don't understand the substance of it, it is kind of frustrating to see oftentimes that you have this one institution that has an academic presentation where we study the edicts of our religion and what one is supposed to do and that kind of thing, and with all of those scholarly references and so on, go to say that you're obligated as a Muslim to fight people until they declare that your religion is correct, or they pay you protection money, that they don't have any power in politics, that you rule over them. But as long as it's kind of presented in a kind of calm academic manner and not very directly being implemented into politics where you're disenfranchising religious minorities, then you're still considered a moderate. But once somebody takes those ideas and actually applies them in politics, then the moderate suddenly becomes extreme, which obviously is not a model that holds up to scrutiny.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So, did you also grow up in a religious environment like that? Was your family religious in that way? Did you grow up, I don't know, being told to hate religious minorities? How was that for you, and how did you start coming out of this mindset?
Well, yeah, I was raised in a Muslim family, yeah, and this Muslim family was a little bit more Islamic than your average Egyptian Muslim family. And for example, I used to go to a school in summer to learn Quran, so I did not have a normal summer vacation or so. And I used to go to the mosque from early age, at 6 or so, more than once a day. And with 8, I started to have doubts in Islam because some things start not to make sense for me. Like, why should I just believe someone? Like, people lie. And as a teenager, I started to see the West, and I started to notice that Islam promises us heaven or the paradise in afterlife, and promises us also excellence in life. But I just noticed that this excellence in life we don't have. Like the West has all the inventions, has all the like lead the world somehow, and we don't do anything. Additionally, financially, we're also not doing well. It's not only technologically or intellectually. And I was like asking my sheikhs or the imams, and yeah, but why we're not better than them? Why they are better? And the answer would be always because we are not following Islam literally. We're not applying Islam as it should be applied. And I was thinking, okay, but Japan does not apply Islam at all, and they are doing better than us. Shouldn't be doing a little better more than Japan because we are applying a little better more Islam than Japan? But it just didn't. I did not find any reasonable answers, and I started to have more doubts and started to read. Reading about philosophy had also a very strong influence, like certain arguments, like problem of evil argument or harder determinism. Problem of evil is that because if God is all powerful, all knowing, all powerful, exists everywhere, then he should be able to prevent evil, and if he didn't do so, then he's somehow also evil, then he cannot be all good. That's like a brief
Yeah.
yeah, a summary of the argument. It just
All
can go really
powerful,
deep,
all,
you
yeah.
know.
If he's all powerful and all good, then
All good, all knowing,
all
and
knowing, then how like then if evil exists, then he should just by his very being stop it from existing.
exactly.
Otherwise, he's either not able to or he's unwilling to, which means he's either not all good or all powerful.
There are religious answers to that, and they are all done. So it's better not to try to. Yeah, I mean, I
I
have no
mean, yeah,
respect.
it's a whole discussion that you can go very deep into. I mean, I think the most interesting kind of just, I guess, blanket response to a lot of kind of responses to it, which, I mean, actually, I don't necessarily agree that all responses to it are dumb. Especially, I've been giving some thought to, I guess, my more traditional philosophical view of suffering being something to minimize, this kind of utilitarian view that goes back to like thousands of years. Even the Buddhist tradition framing suffering as something to be avoided. Well, maybe it's something that where kind of good cannot exist without evil, kind of thing. That
Creating the need to suffer, creating the need to suffer, or creating creatures that are able to sin or to deserve suffering. So creating even creatures that deserve to suffer are evil in itself. And if you can explain that with free will, if you try to say, yeah, but free will cannot exist without the ability to sin, then maybe heaven have no free will. And
basically the argument, I guess, of from nuance, that you can really appreciate something like health if you know that sickness also exists, for example. But the interesting thing about that kind of argument is that, sure, in theory it can be, it's conceivable, but it's just as the opposite is also just as conceivable. It's also possible that, just as you can say, oh, sickness has a purpose in existing in concretizing the value, the positive value of something like health, you can turn that on its head and say that health exists only to make sickness even worse. And that goes to the evil God hypothesis, where you can. I'm sure you've come across that one. I mean, it's yeah, one of my favorite experiments there, where yeah, every argument that you can use to kind of prove that God is good is, it's just as possible that God is evil. But nobody believes in an evil God because nobody wants to believe in an evil God. And this is the crux of the issue: wishful thinking. When it comes to the whole good evil discussion. Anyway, that's completely off topic. Um, but but it is an interesting topic.
Yeah, and then there is that hard determinism thing.
Did you talk about all of that with your family and with your religious community?
No, they wouldn't
Never.
understand. No, they wouldn't understand. I only talked with some Christians friends at the
Okay.
university, and they tried to do missionary work and make me Christian.
Yes, hard determinism. I mean,
Yeah, so it's basically this. I think we are governed through the laws of physics. Our ideas are manifestations of our biology, or like the biological processes in our brains, and that means that laws of nature just governs everything, even our ideas and actions. And that means that one could drive the future from the past, and that makes like free will is an illusion simply that happens in our brain, and if there is no free will, then it's not possible to really then it doesn't make sense to go to hell for your choices.
sure. I would actually make the argument that Islam is compatible with hard determinism. I mean, if you look at the Quran, right? God is the one who makes you believe or disbelieve or puts kind of blocks your heart from knowing the truth or that kind of thing. It's less compatible with Christianity, but actually, I think it's fairly compatible with Islam. I mean, when it comes to good and mercy and, giving people a fair chance, there's another argument to be made. But, I mean, you can fit it in with a worldview where you have an evil god that is kind of ruling over a universe that is deterministic.
Yeah, he guides who he will, and he misguide and mislead who he will, and so يضل من يشاء ويهدي من يشاء.
Yeah, exactly.
That's even in itself, but it's really sometimes all the mental tricks that Muslim people must do in order to avoid just intuitive and logical things, and to ignore them, or not to think, or to be able not to think properly, or not read it properly in order to avoid this simple intuitive truths, is also a lot of pressure. It's not easy to be a Muslim. You would have to just cancel logic in certain places of your brain, and it's a lot of effort sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to circle back to the question of Muslim identity and, the fact that fundamentalist Muslims especially find this kind of thing to be more of an issue than, say, a more traditional Christian family or, I guess, a Jewish community, where belief might be very secondary to community. Yeah, I mean, the question of Muslim identity is I think, a very interesting one that we should circle back to, because it's not a self-evident fact that just because you have doubts in, the factual claims of the religious tradition that you're in, that should automatically mean that you are out of the community of this tradition. Right. But fundamentalist Muslims have kind of made it that way, so that if you want to maintain this kind of tribal identity, then you have to also hold to certain confessions, to certain unaltered beliefs about the universe, even if they don't make sense.
Yeah, I think the hardest point is that leaving Islam comes with really, really strong consequences. It means in certain communities it's death, in others it's prison, harassment, social cancellation, and it's like in my country, it's not only one would risk prison or losing jobs or so. It would also be considered a social suicide. And with this treatment for ex-Muslims, it's hard to stay in the community and be part of it or so. I think maybe other communities are more tolerant with ex-Christian or ex-Jewish or so. I mean, Jewish is being a ethnicity. It's mostly actually an ethnicity, not a religion anymore. And there is a lot of atheist Jews. Yeah, so.
Sure. And I mean, religious categories are very fluid things that, they have, like ethnicity and religion are very interwoven things in any case. It's a little easier to conceive of them as things that are completely separate when you are in an environment that is predominantly Muslim, and because everybody here believes this set of propositions, they're part of a religious community, and once you stop believing that, then you're out of this religious community. And it's kind of a simple calculus there. But when you come to Europe, for example, where Muslims are a minority, you see that there is an ethnicized kind of nature that comes to this to those community, where it stops becoming only about accepting a certain set of propositions, but it also has an ethnic element to it. And by the way, the fact that Jewish communities place so much more value on community and tradition than on belief makes it so that those people have a lot more intellectual freedom to explore different questions about the universe, and that's probably the reason why Jews are overrepresented in Nobel Prize winners and academic high achievers. Right, because they don't have the same restrictions that Christians for a long time have had, that Muslims to this day in so many communities still have.
I'm not really sure that the teachers of Judaism are the reason, or the main reasons why the Jews.
I'm not saying the teachings of Judaism in themselves, or the traditions, or the beliefs themselves. I'm saying it's the specific kind of attitude towards community being more important than belief, and a Jewish community can still continue to exist, and somebody can still remain a part of it and not lose anything from that dimension by questioning, for example, the existence of God or anything like that. So a Jew has a lot more intellectual freedom to explore their own mind and the universe without fear of repercussion, and still have a community that supports them. That's what I mean.
Yeah, that might be a factor why they are excelling academically. I think just to tie Islam to an ethnicity, aesthetically, I'm not sure if that would be correct. I mean, there are Arabs, people who speak Arabic, but I'm not sure, like some Egyptians say, we are Egyptians, we're not Arabs. And like I've heard of some genetic tests, and these genetic tests could really distinguish people who live in Egypt from people who live in Saudi Arabia, and from people who live in Algeria. And we are all Arabs because we speak Arabic. But can we say that Arabic is an ethnicity? I'm not really sure, being an Arabic. And if we cannot say that for Arabic, then
I would make the argument that it is an ethnicity, but also you can have multiple ethnicities within the same kind of cultural space. I mean, look, ethnicity is, the way I view them, they're social constructs that are constantly being created and evolving. And, it's not something that, has kind of an independent existence outside of the sociological analysis that we might make, or the social categorizations that we have historically placed people in, right? So,
okay, that might be correct. And I mean, what I want to say is that because so many people looks like me or looks like you are Muslims, that does not mean that Islam is part of our genetic combination, or are part of our ethnicity, or part of our. That's what I want to say, that Islam is an ideology. It could change. There are people. It's not written in our DNA. And if there is something bad in Islam, that could be eliminated also and could be improved. Islam itself, some people refuse to be are born to be are being forced or brainwashed to be Muslims from their parents, and then grow up and choose not to be Muslims. That's totally okay. It's only an ideology. It's not an ethnicity. It's not part of my ethnicity. And the problem is that this ideology is being infused so strongly in the culture, and they like work together to shape our societies and our culture and our heritage, unfortunately. But the problem is that with Islam is that the holiness characteristic of it, and then the protection layers that being dealt upon of this holiness. You cannot really criticize it, and you cannot easily change it. And I think this is the biggest problem. And that's...
I completely understand what you're saying, and you make some very important points there about ideology having an effect on the way that society works and people treat each other, and how people do have agency and do have choices about the kinds of values they want to promote and be a part of in that sense. I mean, is that I do notice that in Europe, at least, people can hold multiple identities at the same time, and community identities can still be maintained, where somebody can say, for example, that they're Catholic or something, and tend like have all of those traditions with marriage and holidays and the festive things, while at the same time also openly identifying as an atheist. And I mean, the book by Ali Rizvi, The Muslim Atheist, goes a little more in depth into this whole problem and question. It's an interesting question about in how far we can treat Islam as an ethnicity, while also being critical of the ideology.
Islam it cannot be an ethnicity, because you have all races and all colors can be Muslim. It cannot be an ethnicity. It's just not possible. I don't think so. And ethnicity, I think it has some sort of genetic aspects.
Well, I mean, certain sets of common ancestries are kind of represented in different Muslim communities, and more importantly, I guess what I'm talking about are traditions and cultural elements that kind of form this commonality. I mean, being completely realistic, I mean, about the future, I guess that's something also we can circle back to later, where
I would like just to speak about culture a little bit and all of that. I'm a little bit of... I try even in culture to be sometimes guided by science. For example, part of our culture in Egypt are certain meals or certain dishes that we certain sort of music. And actually now science are being so sophisticated that it could evaluate the effect of certain culture aspects on our lives. And we could rate this culture aspect and see if they have a good influence or a bad influence. For example, our food in Egypt, I find it to be a little bit problematic. It's part of our culture, but...
You want to abolish falafel now?
A little bit with frying in oil. I mean, it's not the healthiest, but we might be innovative a little bit and just like work on that. Even so, the culture would be more science guided with science, and that would make our culture able to integrate. If all the culture somehow just are revised through science and change it a little bit, then we could infuse cultures together much easily, because they have this scientific interface between them. And right now, we don't have that in our culture. I don't think even that the West have that strongly, but they have it more than us. They are more guided by science than us. And that's what I think. I think we need more science in our culture. It's not only the past and it's only our history. Our history might not, or our traditions and our customs might not always be the best things to live by and to do, even if it's not holy. But you cannot really change a lot if you have this holiness of Islam overall on being protected, and this holiness or these traditions are being protected by prison and discrimination and all of these terrible things that we have to suffer if we just dare and to say this doesn't make sense or that doesn't make sense, or so. If you said that Zamzam water has toxin in it, then you will suffer, I think, in your country maybe, or in my country, because it's being considered holy. And
yeah, sure, sacred beliefs and dogmas, they don't help a society go anywhere. I completely agree with you on that point. And, having a greater respect for science and a more flexible way of living our lives as a society is definitely something that I agree we should strive towards more. But also, I think large parts of human culture are not necessarily good or bad. They exist in kind of a gray amoral category that is just kind of is. It's just the way that people do things. It's people identify with each other with certain traditions, and whether a Muslim would bury their dead in kind of a rope in a smaller grave, a more tilted grave, and a Christian would bury their dead in a box, and those are kind of minute differences in practice that
even that could be scientifically analyzed and aesthetically analyzed, which one are bad for the land. For example, how much land requires the Christians versus the Muslim versus incrimination if somebody burns a body, which is better for the environment. Having a wood box being so you cut trees. I mean, there are ways to analyze everything, maybe in a scientific or the statical or the even economical way, and
you can make your personal choices based on that. And I think you and I, we find ourselves in the same camp. I don't identify as a Muslim. You don't identify as a Muslim either, even though we both come from those communities. And, our lives are thus far completely divorced from the religious traditions and all of that, right? As former Muslims who, as I sometimes like to say, ex-Muslims don't necessarily freely leave the religion. It's more like they're kicked out of it because there is a certain orthodoxy about what you're supposed to believe in a Muslim community, and so if you're not able to engage with the community in a meaningful way anymore, so you just leave. Given the fact that, of course, I do not have any Islamic practices or community practices or weddings or funerals or music or anything like that, there's no basis for me to identify as a Muslim. I would hope, though, that for future generations and for people maybe kind of growing up now, that that the way that they live their lives wouldn't be immensely changed by their kind of realization that maybe they don't believe in God, for example, right? That they still celebrate the same holidays and so on. And I think if the Muslim world is going to progress, there has to be a sort of dilution of the dogmatic nature of the religion rather than, an outright rejection of the kind of heritage that comes with it.
Yeah, I agree. It should be. I totally agree that Islam is reformable, that we could change it step for step, step by step, a little bit by a little bit. However, I just look around and I see no one is fit to do the job. No one is doing the job. It's just like no one, even those who, consider themselves moderate or say that they are moderate, they are to a big part extremist. Maybe there are people who are really moderate 100%, but these people have no followings. They are totally almost 100% ignored. And that's a problem. And I just do not see a lot of solutions. Maybe an atheist person should sacrifice and start to work as an imam and try to fix from inside. That might be a way to go.
I mean, I obviously don't have a very optimistic view of this, of this being reachable, at least in kind of intellectually honest ways and in open ways that I mean, I think here in Berlin, for example, we have this initiative for a liberal mosque, right? By said an atheist, even should go to mosque.
Gotha Mosque did close, correctly?
Yes.
Okay, so they had very little following, and then they have a lot of threats. So they felt like
it was an initiative worth doing. Hopefully, they open up again. I mean, I did go there before. I mean, it kind of shows a model of what might be possible in terms of an Islam that is more open to the world, and we can see also in this example as well as historical examples. You look at Al-Hallaj, you look at Rumi, you look at a lot of brilliant not Muslim thinkers that not just scientific thinkers and so on, like spiritual thinkers, Sufi masters that really laid the groundwork for a lot of more modern spiritual thought, and they have some very interesting and sophisticated ideas, but this kind of thought has never been expedient for the people who have political power, and it's always more expedient to tell people, that if you fight for your country and if you fight for your caliph, your king, then you're going to go to heaven and get 72 virgins and that kind of thing. And if you disagree, then we're gonna send somebody to kill you. And there's the scriptural justification for it, and the fact that Islamic history has been plagued by despotic autocrats kind of plays a big role in the way in which Islam has evolved over the centuries, and yeah, I mean, perhaps a further separation between a state and religion can allow for a more free discourse within Muslim communities, and remove the pressure to be so extreme and to be so militaristic about all of that.
I think Islam requires an intellectual civil war. So the problem is that this extremist ideologies of Wahhabism and Salafism, so they are not being defeated. They are not being defeated intellectually. And more than that, there is no alternative. There is no real moderate alternatives are being represented. So I think the way I imagine a reformation in Islam is that through first, you have to have this intellectual fight and defeat all the crazy Wahhabists and then you would introduce something that is more really intellectually has a really strong fundamentals in Islam, and this is really moderate, 100%. And then you would, in order to achieve that, you'd have to work on two axes or two ways. One would be the pressure that is being done through not Muslims, ex-Muslims, for example. So if Muslims are doing something bad, then you apply pressure and say, yeah, please don't do these things bad, and don't do these bad things or so. And I could imagine, for example, letting adult men marry women and children or so, or that should not be allowed. And it happens in certain Muslim places in the world. And in other places, there was intellectual fights and legal fights that prevented this from happening. So this sort of pressure is really important. Other sort of support to a new Islam would be financing the correct people that would actually, within Islam, would provide a new vision. This is really tolerant and compatible with civilization, and also fight the current status quo with this extremism status. And the problem here is that we have a lot who are out, who might be applying pressure, but we don't have people who are in that also smart enough and intellectually honest enough to do that. A lot of imams and shuyukh pretend to be moderates, but they are not. And they are getting support because they are moderates, but they are really not moderates. And that's I find problematic, because they are not. They are taking resources, so wasting resources, and working in a direction of no solution, and that's I find it really problematic. So.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to funding, that is a big issue, because how can you even compete with the sources of money that the extremists are getting, right? I mean, for decades and decades, the Saudis, the Qataris have been pouring billions and billions all around the world, and Islamic education that teaches people to hate people who think differently, and to enforce their sexual morality and so on their fellow human beings.
Well, I mean, it's Western money, or what? And this Qataris money is coming from the West.
Largely, yeah, but also, I mean, the point I'm getting to is that this is fundamentally a political problem, right? The West has very important interests in funding those states, and those states have interests in funding this extremism around the world. And it's very difficult to compete with that financially in financing more moderate communities.
The United States has military bases in Saudi Arabia, they have military bases in Qatar, and they have strong influence. And if they really want that, if they really mean business, if the Americans mean business, I think they are in a position where they could influence the politics of these countries to a big extent, very big extent.
They can certainly do more. There's no disagreement there. Yeah, I mean, going a little deeper into the theological background of this, it's like one of the important questions, for example, which almost all modern Muslims agree on, is that the Quran is the direct and eternal word of God, right? And this poses a problem when it, like, if you want to stand against, orders and political rulings given in the Quran. When you have this one section telling men to beat their wives, you have another section, telling people to fight other people until they agree with them, fighting those who disbelieve, cutting off arms and legs of political enemies, that kind of thing. If you believe that this is a document that's the direct word of God, that's eternal, that is not restricted by time, then it's very difficult to make an argument against the implementation of those things, given that the text is fairly clear about those commandments. There's only so far you can go in reinterpreting the word beat or this or that word. At a certain point, you just can't plausibly go further. But I think what does work and has worked historically is questioning this fundamental assumption that the Quran is the eternal, uncreated, direct word of God, and just seeing it as a sort of creation in a category similar to a lot of other documents that are within this category of creation. That are kind of constricted by a certain period of time, by specific people's political motives, and aren't always applicable, right? I mean, a lot of early Muslim thinkers actually had a philosophical problem with the idea that the Quran was an eternal kind of word of God, because if the Quran is also eternal, that means that it could not be created. It is uncaused, right? If it is uncaused, then it is a partner to God, or it is kind of part of the essence of God. If the essence of God is divisible in that way, then he cannot be self-sufficient, right? Because a self-sufficient entity cannot have composite parts, as the famous argument goes.
Really interesting argument. I've never heard it before. It sounds really cool.
So yeah, I mean, going more in depth into it, it's Avicenna, the Ibn Sina, the Kalam cosmological argument, the one that has gained a lot of popularity among Christian apologists, where it basically says if everything that started to exist has a cause, the universe started to exist, therefore the universe has a cause, in very simple format. Ibn Sina even expounds on this and explains, okay, so the problem with saying, for example, that the universe is a self-sufficient cause in itself is that the universe has composite parts, and so it has to be caused by those composite parts kind of working together to form a whole, and so it cannot be uncaused by that logic. So therefore, an uncaused cause can only exist in a manner that is self-sufficient, meaning that it cannot have different parts of it. It needs to just be, a single entity without, different body parts, different attributes that are separable to, it has to be completely indivisible. Other than the Quran not being eternal under this interpretation, also, God's corporeality, right? Tajseed, that's also a big argument that has been going on in Islamic history. Does God actually have a body or not? Right? Does God have hands and eyes and legs? The Salafis, the mainstream Orthodox Islam would very emphatically say yes, and you're a heretic if you say no, right? So God literally has feet, right? He puts his feet in hellfire because it's just to fill it up because it's hungry. There's a hadith that says that God has two right hands, and even some Shia groups today will tell you, you idiots, that's kind of a figurative expression for generosity. Somebody has two right hands. He doesn't literally have two right hands. But no, Salafis will literally interpret it that way. No, our God literally has two hands on the right side of his. Maybe he has one left hand.
He's God after all.
Yeah. Does he have wings? Does he have genitals? Modern Orthodox, Salafis, they have also historically kind of stood against philosophical exploration of those questions, and have pushed for this way of looking at it, like bila kayf, right? And without asking why, just accept that kind of thing, and don't ask why, don't ask how, don't ask too many questions. That's
they say, as I was a kid, they taught me Islam, that Allah was light and one could not describe him. However, I had dreams of Allah and he looked like Sphinx, exactly. So in my dreams. I think our way out of this violence in Quran is could be inspired a little bit with from the Bible. The Bible has two parts: first testimony and second testimony, or New Testament. Yeah, and this new has more peace and love than the first one. And the difference between those two was the crucifixion of Jesus. So Jesus died for our sins, and then we get to enjoy this peace and love of the New Testament. And in Islam, maybe we could have something like that. There was the life of the Prophet, so he fought wars of our sins, for our sins. He killed. He did the really, really difficult things that was inhuman, and he had to live with all the psychological guilt. Let us say that he wasn't a psychopath and he felt guilt when he killed people. Then maybe now we could enjoy the peace. Maybe we could enjoy lakum dinakum waliya din. You have your religion, we have our religion. So there was in Islam, I think, two periods as the Muslims were in Mecca, and Quran was free, has more peace and freedom in it. And then afterwards, when the Islam started to be strong, then all the violence verses did emerge. Is that correct? I think you studied in Saudi Arabia more Quran than me.
Yes, generally the verses that are attributed to be written afterwards are more violent, and the ones before, or in the Meccan period, for example, where Muslims weren't so many, they didn't have that much political power. They were more peaceful in the political sense.
Exactly. And that could be used in our interest to say the violence. The early Muslim did suffer violence and had to fight many wars. And these verses were for them so that we enjoy the peaceful verses of Mecca and we live only through the peaceful verses of Mecca, and all the violence is nur for historical reference, so we could appreciate how merciful and loving God is for us now to give us so much peace and love. For example, that might be a way out. So what I say is that to change Islam, it's intellectually not impossible, even with all the violence of Quran. You just have to shift the perspective of people a little bit and think out of the box.
Do you see a point in the future, or do you see the possibility where the Quran is not seen as a binding prescription anymore? I mean, I think largely this is the problem, right? The idea that this is the binding prescription for all times.
I hope so. I think it's possible. I think one must make the argument for it. One must fight the intellectual wars with the Salafis and Wahhabis and so. And you have to win this war, and then you have a better Islam. And then you have also better Middle East. And that's a way out of it. And the problem is that I don't see anyone on the stage that can do such a thing, that has the charisma, that has what it takes. He has to be a Muslim. He cannot do that as an ex-Muslim. And so we have a lot of ex-Muslim and that can apply pressure, very strong intellectual pressure. We are a minority, but intellectually we can defend ourselves very strongly and our positions very strongly. However, we don't have people from inside that trying to do the repair work. What I imagine that the governments are doing, they try to distract people in order to control extremism. For example, in Saudi Arabia or in Egypt or so, they distract people and they suppress the extremists, but they do not really deal with the intellectual problems of Islam, and that's a big problem, because the problem is that when you suppress, is that you have to be always suppressing, otherwise they would explode if you don't, and that creates also the need for a dictator. So we are there in order to set order, because if you're not there, they will just vote a terrorist in government. And that happened in Egypt with the Muslim Brotherhood. And I think the Muslim Brotherhood did win the election, but they were not the favorite candidates of the people. The favorite candidates were much extremist than the Muslim Brotherhood, but they did get disqualified. So that's a problem. That's also why we have dictatorships in the Middle East, is to a big part is because the dictatorships do not really solve the problems that requires their existence. And we have an infinite loop of oppression and extremism that is really never broken. And I hope one day this chain gets broken. And I think the way to break it is through political will and money, but money in the correct places. And the West proved not to be so smart with their money in this. So they invested and did give support, for example, in Germany, to organizations that seems to be not really moderate, but say we are moderates. So I think the people who can do it are actually the Arabs or the Muslims or the Middle Easterns. That might happen through Western pressure on the governments.
I mean, it's very difficult to create pressure from the inside, as both of us know from personal experience, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah. From the inside to create pressure is like sometimes signing your death certificate or so. It's just not easy.
And what you mentioned there is also something I mentioned in the previous video about this, where you do have this kind of endless cycle of revolutions in the Arab world, where oftentimes Islamists will take part, and then if a more secular faction ends up taking more power, people start turning against each other, and the secular dictators will start using the Islamists as this kind of boogeyman that they need to be protected again, protected from, while at the same time kind of low-key being permitted to engage with the communities and engage in, I guess, things like anti-poverty measures and Islamic education and that kind of thing. So that the basic substance of the extremism is still being spread around, while the political arm of this ideology is temporarily being paralyzed, right? That is going to have sway on world governments and the West, and people looking from the outside that look, so the dictators are keeping things in check. They're protecting the people from themselves and from the Islamists that would otherwise be in power, and while at the same time not really allowing a democratic alternative to emerge and have an open intellectual discourse about the different points of view. And I wish honestly that those people had more opportunity to express themselves. The Islamists, the terrorists, I wish that they should have a voice, but under the condition that we also have a voice, and we can also respond to them and have an open discussion. And I think over time, if we have a society with an open conversation about this, then we can move forward.
The problem is that I think that is a part of disadvantage of democracy, is that politicians appease to the majority, and they have the numbers in our countries. And as an ex-Muslim, I'm as a very small minority in the pool of immigrants that are coming here from the Middle East, for example. So exactly, they have the numbers, so they can move people, they can move demonstrations, they can influence elections. And sometimes if you have this sort of power, then your arguments doesn't really matter a lot.
Yeah, it's definitely a complex problem. I don't want to oversimplify it. We saw this kind of in the Arab Spring, right? 2011, 2012, as after, I guess a couple of revolutions since the overthrow of the monarchy, and as the Muslim Brotherhood was banned, the people went out to the street and pushed the military to help them overthrow the dictator Mohammed at the time. Tell me about your experience of those events. And I think it's also very relevant to this point, right? The military's role, the strong-handed dictatorship role in limiting Islamism. As an aside, I also have come across reports that former Muslims and secular people had more opportunity or felt that they were finally free in some ways to advocate for secularism and to come out as ex-Muslims, although that didn't last very long. Yeah, tell me about your experience with that.
Yeah, back then during Mubarak, the media and Islamic organizations and so have always sold this narrative that Mubarak is a big problem for Egypt, and without Mubarak, we are going to be free and happy, and we're going to be, all our dreams will be simply true. So financial luxury, scientific progress, and as if Mubarak was holding all of that, which is also not true. Not only, and Muslim Brotherhood at the late time of Mubarak started also to gain political power. For example, I remember seeing Islam is the solution slogans of the Muslim Brotherhood everywhere in Egypt. So Islam is the answer, Islam is the solution, always. And they dominated actually our Senate, our parliament. So they dominated the votes, they won most seats when there was a little bit of freedom at the late period of Mubarak's rule. And after all, many people didn't think Islamically as they wanted Mubarak out of the government or out of power. They just wanted a better life. They wanted a better life, simply as that. They hoped on a better life, more freedom, better financial situation, and so on.
Was there any measure of political freedom during Mubarak's time?
At the end, there was a little bit of more and more freedom. For example, Muslim Brotherhood were allowed to participate in the parliament elections, and they won a lot of seats. And so there was tendency to more freedom. And then the revolution happened. People was like, yeah, we want freedom. For me, I thought I want to be like the West. Now we have a chance to liberate ourselves. And many people were naive because everybody has their small social bubble, and we don't know what others are like. Strongly. So you live in your social bubble and the other live in their social bubble, and we do not interact a lot. But then after the revolution, it was very obvious that the majority are easily dominated through the Islamists, these fundamental extremist Islamists like the Muslim Brotherhood, and even worse groups than the Muslim Brotherhood or worse individuals. And that was really obvious in the talk shows. There was a period after Mubarak, there was a period of freedom. So people would go on talk shows and speak. However, the Islamists would be able to speak freely because the dictatorship of Mubarak did put the foundation of Islam. So when they speak of having slaves back then, like the Prophet time, the majority wouldn't say how crazy is that to think of having slaves back then. That was like a serious discussion on Egyptian TV back then, I remember.
They were having serious conversations on television about bringing back slavery, and that was during Mubarak's time.
That was the part of the period of freedom after Mubarak. So yeah, what I wanted to recap it, many people participated in this revolution overthrowing Mubarak, did not understand to what extent these Islamists are influential and strong, and to what extent they are able to control people and use this Islamic fundamentals that was planted all over the years through Al-Azhar to radicalize the people really easily. And as manifestation of that, you would find imams speaking about bringing back slavery or trying to analyze our economical declines in Egypt for lack of wars. So back then the Prophet did make wars and brought things that was stolen from other countries, and now we're not doing that anymore, and for that reasons we are poor. That was a true discussions, and if you try to tell them what's wrong with you, why you're saying such a thing, then they will just try to cite Quran verses or hadith or so, and then you're lost automatically. And you're lost because you're not allowed to say I'm an atheist. You're not allowed to speak against Islam, because this culture to criticize Islam was a taboo in the.
You're not allowed to question their sources and the authority of their sources.
Yeah, exactly. And then you go in the talk shows, you might have an atheist or somebody who's very liberal, but he is tied. He cannot really express himself freely. But on the other side, you have these Islamists who can all say all these despicable things, and nobody raise an eyebrow or say what are you talking about? And then the Islamists can easily dominate, because this culture of tolerance, because this Islam does not have this tolerance of criticism from other people or from outsider also. And even from insider, it's really touchy if you want to criticize some aspect or a mazhab, so a certain group of Muslims, intellectual group of Muslims or so. If you want to criticize that, you have to do it really carefully. Otherwise, other groups are saying you're a kafir, you're no longer a Muslim, you're out of. And then this culture of intolerance made it easy for them to dominate the election, and the political nature of Islam also made it easy for them to dominate the elections, because Islam has a strong political nature and it has this holy aspects, and then it's being strongly.
So to be clear about the timeline, part of what you're describing here when it comes to discussions, was that before the election of the Muslim Brotherhood in Morsi?
Yeah, that was before the election of Morsi.
So at the time, I mean, there was barely any opportunity for political groups and parties to develop and form a following to pose a formidable opposition to the Muslim Brotherhood, right? I mean, you don't have the opportunity to organize and form committees and parties and that kind of thing. Not in Mubarak's time, not in the revolutionary time, certainly not after Morsi was elected.
I think the problem is not that if Azhar did not exist, if Mubarak's regimes did not put this Islamic fundamental, Muslim Brotherhood wouldn't have also the opportunity to organize themselves. They were organized, these Islamic groups were organized because millions and millions or billions are being funded to Al-Azhar that actually spreads in every mosque at Fridays. You don't have, you cannot imagine. I mean, I'm not sure if you can really imagine how much mosques do we have in Egypt. Like, I live in a street. In my street, there are 3 mosques.
So basically, they control all of the mosques, and those are basically their political beacons. There's the source of their political power, right? Their control of this vast network of mosques all around the country, right?
Azhar controls these mosques, and it works all the time on spreading this ideology. Even if they try to avoid political topics sometimes, they still have the fundamentals, the Islamic fundamentals that would make it really easy to switch the narrative to a political narrative. And they work all the time, and they are being sponsored by the state. However, other political parties or other groups don't have this big benefit that the Muslim Brotherhood have, or this state-sponsored Islam.
So they're not practically able to develop politically, and once the Muslim Brotherhood was elected, of course, things got even worse, right? I mean, all the sapling political parties, any new initiatives to organize people and advocate for true democracy got banned and persecuted, and the media got persecuted, and parliament was dissolved. So there was absolutely no recourse for anyone to change the way that things work other than force. And this is why Egypt is under a military dictatorship.
You summarize it perfectly. And during the Muslim Brotherhood governing period, things started to get interesting. The thing is that Egypt has these organizations that are built through the military. And I speak of our intelligence agencies, the Mukhabarat, of our national security agencies. And so there's very strong organizations. And these organizations was still governed by the same people who were governing maybe during Mubarak time or so, or people who were their friends. Okay. So that's a big problem that the Muslim Brotherhood did face, that the loyalty of people who are in power of these really powerful organizations are not really to the Muslim Brotherhood. They are to actually the same sort of regime like Mubarak's regime.
Kind of a political, kind of internal power problem there. Yeah.
Exactly. And so in this time of, you start to have a lot of also new satellite channels that started to attack the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Muslim Brotherhood couldn't do a lot because the power of these organizations were still not 100% in their hand. So even during Morsi, there was a period of freedom, because this period of freedom, it was like guided by this, we say, the deep state. We used this deep state definition, begref.
Like the remnants of the Mubarak administration.
Yeah, somehow. Yeah, exactly. And this deep state had a strong influence, and they managed actually gradually to control the public opinion a little bit by little bit. And they managed to do that timely before they started to be replaced, because the Muslim Brotherhood wanted to replace people gradually who are in these strong positions to seize the 100% control of the country. But they didn't have enough time, and the army did overthrow them simply. Personally, I was against overthrowing a democratically elected president the way it happened, because that destroyed our democratic system.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've read quite a bit on it, and other people. I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess I don't quite have the experience to have a like sort of definitive opinion on this, but another opinion from like Hamid Abdul Samad, for example, is that this was not a coup at all. This was basically the execution of the people's last cry for help, and their final attempt to take back political power. Even though, I mean, obviously they don't have political power now. But the thing is, there's a difference between. Okay, so it was a democratically elected government, but not a government with democratic values.
Actually, that's the thing. It was a government without a democratic values, and if they had more time, I think they would have established the rule so strongly that even the army wouldn't be able to overthrow them. And the rule would 100% not be democratic. It would be theocratic. And but even before the overthrowing Morsi, in this period, as Morsi governed, it was democratic to a big part. So much more democratic than after Morsi. So if we speak of freedom of speech, freedom to criticize the president.
But you also just said that the Muslim Brotherhood would have made things even worse. And
I agree. I have no doubt, but they didn't get the chance to make it even worse.
So that would that kind of indicate that the military coup was kind of a necessary evil?
I am not sure. I can imagine that many people were against this military coup. I would say the majority didn't agree of it, but the thing is that the police started to shoot demonstrations that were going against demonstrations that is pro-Morsi, and the media was to a big part controlled of this deep state, and for that reason the media did not also show all the sides of the situation. And for that reason, it just seemed as if that was the will of people, but I think the will of people was really Islamic. And they wanted Morsi. But it was deadly. It was deadly to want Morsi in this time. People have died. They got shot who defended him. To my part, I certainly find that the army is less evil than the Islamists, because the army is not spreading a certain ideology that would have been so deep anchored in people the same way the Muslim Brotherhood would have done.
I mean, at a certain point, I think it is preferable to have a cynical, self-interested government than one that is suicidally ideological, right?
So I mean, the current government, or Sisi, or the army government, is more oppressive. It's oppressive, but it has also this Islamic ideology, this Islamic aspects that would also allow the extremists to be again in power easily if they are no longer existing, but they are not doing any additional work. The Muslim Brotherhood would have went to new levels of extremism.
And another just brief point on democracy, something that Islamists as well as fascists very often would raise is that basically liberal Democrats are hypocrites, because they only believe in majority rule as long as as long as people don't choose that kind of authoritarianism. And I think this perspective kind of betrays a fundamental misunderstanding of liberal democracy itself. It's not just about majority rule, it's about universal representation and, a government that is really there to serve the people and from like the initiative of the electorate. That's so you can have situations where you have tyranny of the majority, where if everybody can vote but a religious majority votes to have a religious minority exterminated, then obviously the voices of this community is not being represented, and this is also not democratic. The same goes for Trojan horse movements, and when Nazis want to get into government, when the Muslim Brotherhood wants to get into government, they're very openly, in principle, against the fundamentals of liberal democracies. Yet they use the system just to get in, so that they can promptly shut the door behind them. And obviously, this is self-destructive. Like if a liberal democracy were to accept that within its political system, that would be self-destructive, and this cannot be allowed, which is why stable and advanced liberal democracies like Germany today do have rail guards against that kind of thing. And sometimes political parties can be banned, and political groupings can be banned if they so openly stand against the very principle of democracy that they can use to gain power.
I think democracy in itself is not enough. I would have hoped for my country that this strong propaganda machine that worked against Morsi would have tried to work to establish other ideologies, for example, like secularism or like humanism, and all of that would work together for the next election after Morsi time, so that we could choose somebody who actually would be able to do good for the country. So we had this situation of a balance between the government, the Islamic government, and the army. So the army that is not Islamic, and they were like fighting on power a little bit. If the 3 years would have passed, and then we have a new election, and in these 3 years, the media would have worked in informing people other better ideologies. This is not only democratic, but also go a bit further to humanism and secularism. Maybe we would have had a better chance. But the thing is that maybe we wouldn't have also enough time, because also 3 years are not enough to change the strongly anchored ideologies that are Islamic in nature, and maybe work against this secularism and work against humanism even, and human rights. And so I think we always in Egypt speak respectfully of democracy. We want a democracy, but the thing is that democracy in itself, as you said, could be used to exterminate a minority.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how you understand democracy, and the way I would understand it, it's not just simply about majority rule. It's about really universal enfranchisement of the people. And if a minority has is being so suppressed that their voices and their votes aren't being heard, so that the majority can overrun them and completely exterminate them in the worst of cases, then that's not a democracy that's functioning. And the same could be said, of a political system like I think Egypt is a very good example, where say people can vote, but they're not allowed to get any political education. And it's like even Putin, like what Putin himself would describe as directed democracy, right? If the media is entirely controlled by the government, you only get to hear the messages that the government approves of, and they want to lead you in a certain, like the Islamists want to lead you in this direction, the military want to lead you in that direction. And civil rights groups and independent citizens associations cannot organize themselves properly, then that's also not a functional democracy, even if people can vote.
I totally agree with you. And I think for that reason, we should work for establishing other ideologies. For example, I'm interested in your personal opinion of humanism, like putting the interest of individual humans in center of decisions or political decisions or societal decisions or any sort of decisions. What do you think of that? I know you're doing the interviewing, but I'm really interested in your opinion. It's not really possible for us to have a nice society that is functional and kind to its individuals without having actually humanism at the same time.
I mean, secular humanism is kind of an umbrella term as I see it for, non-religious political ideologies that place the individual human at the center of the value calculation that we make politically. And I think this is the best thing we have tried so far, as I would say. I mean, liberal democratic thinking is humanist at its core, right? Because what it values is the capacity for decision making in the individual, right? The freedom to movement, to expression, to determine one's own political destiny, right? And coupled with the belief that I am kind of better at knowing what's good for me than anyone else, and it is not wise to completely put my trust in some sort of higher dictator or something like that to know what's better for me. Unfortunately, that's the case. I don't think you can ever completely trust anyone at the top, which is why each of us individually needs to retain a certain amount of political power to drive our destiny together towards, like, each towards their own personal interests, and we can kind of reach a point of agreement of optimal results where everyone can be better off. So yeah, I mean, I think humanism is at the core of a functional modern political system.
When I think, for example, of humanism and all of these ideologies and so, I can imagine this imam trying to make the argument for how is it human, the most human thing to do is to force your wife to stay at home, for example, because like you're trying to protect her from her own self also. Like you see the kind of minds you would have to deal with in order to establish something like that. It's not an easy fight. It's not.
But I mean, ultimately, that's not even a humanist rationale that's being used. It's, I guess, a humanist post hoc justification for a value system that is fundamentally based on what is viewed as divine guidance, or the command of God Himself, and this is a distinction between humanist political systems and kind of theocratic ones, or ones that place the will of some imaginary entity above that of humans, as being the arbitrator of good and bad. I mean, fundamentally, a problem with that is, if we do make the assumption, that our political decisions should be made by a divine entity like a god, then we also have to say that even if this god's value assessments aren't good for us, it is the imperative regardless. Yeah. So if God tomorrow, commands us to all kill each other or kill ourselves, it's like, this is the ultimate good that we're striving towards. It's not the good of the individual human being. So it's a set of values that's focused on it's a set of values that is focused in the wrong place, in my opinion, there. I think it's been really interesting talking to you about larger political topics and political ideologies in that detail. I didn't expect this conversation to go in this specific direction. But before we finish this, there are a couple of important points I would like to cover. First of all, the personal hardships that you face because of your coming out to the entire country, basically, and your journey to kind of start a new life in Germany. If there's feel free to say as much or as little as you'd like about your move, but I would like to hear a little bit about the immediate aftermath and about the development of your lives, and maybe give people kind of an idea of the kind of struggle that it takes to build one's life from the ground up again after a traumatic event like that.
Yeah, certainly. So back then, as I went to this show, I was a little bit naive of the dynamics of the internet, so I didn't know what it even means to go viral, or for something to gain overnight a lot of wide attention of the whole country or so. I went to the show, and to my knowledge, it was a small show. It wasn't a big, and I didn't expect a lot of people to see it. And I would have expected maybe afterwards present, but I did not expect it to be widely seen by millions of people. I did not expect this also to have international attention of many big newspapers. So that was a surprise for me. And the immediate aftermath was actually that as I've seen it going live, I've tried to ask people that were working in the show not to go live with it. And it was live, but I've asked them to remove it from YouTube, because it was very embarrassing for me, this interview. And I even thought of killing myself afterwards, and I had very strong. It was really humiliating. This was the whole thing, and then I started to get messages on Facebook from people all over around the world, messages of support actually from Egypt. What I read about it was online discussions of, for example, who should kill me? Should the government systematically execute me, or should a volunteer do the work for the government? However, there was a lot of people who are Muslims who were taking a position of, this is not how you deal with atheists. You should just try to provide convincing arguments, and then if he didn't hear of these convincing arguments of Islam, then it was okay, then you just go crazy as you did.
Yeah, or you scream in their face and tell them to go to a mental hospital. There's no need for violence, right?
Yeah, exactly. So they were the Muslim were in a position of, okay, you should have first tried to provide arguments, and if the arguments didn't work, then you go crazy, but not go crazy from the beginning.
What about your personal life? How did that affect your personal life? Were you working? Were you studying?
Yeah, certainly. I was doing my master back then, and there was a guy that was doing master with me. He has a brother who was actually arrested in a terrorist case in Egypt, and the brother wanted to have seen my interview, and he after a lecture he came to me and just started to knock on my shoulder and say, we need to talk. And I was really scared, and I just didn't go back again to lectures, because I know those things could escalate really easily, and I just wanted to keep as low profile as possible. My family did know of this thing through the TV. Actually, I did not tell them. It just went famous, and then they have watched that on TV one day. Not immediately afterwards, but after a few weeks, I think. And there was a period of a lot of fights, and actually even violence and threats, and it ended up with me saying, okay, I'm back to Islam. And I was being monitored with them to go to the mosque and everything. They even introduced me to Imam in Azhar, and he was managing my transform back to Islam, or my revert back to Islam. So I just played along until I gathered enough resources and support to leave Egypt. I traveled first to Jordan to make sure that I'm on no fly list, because many ex-Muslims are on no-fly lists like Shrif Gaber, for example, or Ahmad Harqan or so. So I wasn't. That was really good. Then, as an Egyptian without a visa, you cannot really go anywhere in the world except for really few countries. One of these countries are Jordan, another country was Ecuador. Between Jordan and Ecuador, there are a lot of transits in Europe. And my goal was countries that respect human rights. And these countries are in Europe or are Western countries, simply. And I went to Ecuador, actually. And then in my flight back to Cairo, there was a transit in Frankfurt. And in Frankfurt, I did apply for asylum in the airport to the police, to the Bundespolizei there. And then I was part of the system and I was processed. And then just my life started to evolve in Germany. The difficulties in Germany, a big difficulty is the language. It's not really easy to have mastery of the German language, and it requires effort and time. Then the society is different. I was very influenced of the Western society. I used to read a lot of it. Actually, the American part of the Western society more, but to live here, it's really different. To experience the things that, for example, I give you a simple example is you go in Egypt out of the house and you wait on the street until a microbus comes to transfer you to your goal. In Germany, we have a train, and this train should come in a certain time and should leave in a certain time. And if you miss the time of the train, then there is a good chance that you would have to wait an hour simply. So everything is more organized than in Egypt, and to integrate in this system, it's also an effort. It's not easy.
It's definitely not, and the asylum process itself is not easy either.
The asylum process was also not easy. I was refused at the beginning, and then I had a really good lawyer who started to do things. I did not. It didn't evolve to the court because the BAMF, like the organization in Germany that is responsible for refugees, they decide that they changed their mind simply without even court. And the first year, without knowing my fate in Germany, was extremely difficult for me because it was like every day I used to have nightmares, and so afterwards things started to get easier. I studied in the university. In German, it was extremely difficult. The system is really, really different. And now I work simply in the corporate world in Germany. And I mean, every day I have to have this integration fight on a culture level. We are not the same. And socially, it's really not easy to build deep friendships in Germany, at least for me, in the place that I live in. Maybe in Berlin it's different.
I suppose it gets easier with time, right? I mean, you get more immersed in the culture and the society, and you find more ways to connect with people.
Still, I tell you that to communicate with an Arab is 100 times easier for me to communicate with a German. I mean, not as a language, but to communicate on a level of friendship. That's still, I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's only me. Maybe you have a better experience than mine.
I mean, I guess, I don't know, I haven't been very good at communicating with Arabs either, so...
So, okay. I try to avoid communicating with Arab in order to learn the language. I try to not to build this social bubble of Arabs because it's much easier to communicate with Arabs for me. Then I don't do it because I believe in integration. I believe that if you build a social circle of Arabs with our culture, then you are missing on learning a better culture.
Sure. I mean, when you're in another country, I don't think it's always the best idea to stay with, a group of people from your country and just stay in this isolated cultural bubble. You want to widen your horizons for sure. You mentioned Sharif Gaber and Ahmed Harqan. They're both in Egypt still, as far as I understand, right?
Actually not. Sharif Gaber is still in Egypt. He's a fugitive inside Egypt. So I think there was 5 years.
He's wanted for criticizing Islam and is not able to leave the country.
Yeah, exactly. There was a 5 years prison sentence against him, and I think now it's 10 years. And it's really, for Sharif, the situation is really critical because he's really famous. And I mean, he cannot even escape illegally normally, because one of those who escapes with him might recognize him and just kill him because
he's widely known, yeah. And I mean, your story with returning to Islam and pretending kind of thing. I mean, I know people in Saudi Arabia who have gone through the exact same thing. It happens very often. And yeah, I guess for somebody like Sharif Gaber, when you have this kind of content going on criticizing, it doesn't help you as much. Unfortunately.
Ahmed Harqan, on the other hand, did manage to leave Egypt, and he maybe, he did. I heard his story of him. It was crazy. I mean, first, before leaving Egypt, he started to say that he's a Muslim again. So he started to say, "Yeah, I'm back to Islam," and I mean, it was really convincing. I mean, I don't know. It was convincing for Muslims, not for us as atheists, because we know that it's like you don't go back to Islam simply. It just doesn't happen. Like I don't know personally any cases that really went back to Islam, and if somebody would do that, it wouldn't be Ahmed Harqan. So, however, it was convincing enough for the Muslims, since they believed him. And he did that because he wanted to leave illegally, and if he left, and on the way to leaving North Africa, you would find places that are controlled of these extremists, and he is really famous. Ahmed Harqan is really, really famous because actually he was an extremist. He was really this sort of extremist that became a Muslim. He wasn't a moderate. And so he's really also famous among extremists. So he started with this going back to Islam thing, and it was convincing to a big part. And he started to journey out of Egypt, I think first to Sudan, then I don't really know what happened, but he says that there was many things that happened that would have killed him if he wasn't lucky enough. So like money being stolen, being lost in the desert, having to sleep in a place where other extremists sleeping and making tests for him. If he waked up, so for example, he was at some point forced to be in the same place with extremists, I think in Libya or so. And then in this situation, they made a test for him. If he said if he waked up to pray the Fajr, so this dawn prayers, then he's good. If he didn't wake up, then he's still an atheist and we kill him, or so, something like that. And yeah, it was like a miracle that he managed to leave this situation, and he ended up in Tunisia. The problem, he wanted to leave Egypt because he had found love in Tunisia and he wanted to be with his loved one, and she couldn't go to Egypt because she had established life in Tunisia, and she wanted to live there. And he tried to go with an airplane, but it didn't work because he's on this list of blocked from traveling or leaving Egypt. And for love, he made it out, and he arrived to Tunisia. And afterwards, the relationship was not successful. However, that does not invalidate the strong love that led him to go through all of these hardships. And then he just went in a boat to Italy. And I think he lives now in Italy, and he is doing well, to my knowledge. He also received residence and everything. So from a legal perspective, he's doing well also. and he works actually also. So he's like trying to learn Italian, and so it's going well for him.
That's wonderful. I mean, I'm happy to hear at least some of the stories, and in a happy way. I mean, there are so many anecdotes that I simply cannot share here, but go in similar lines about people trying to seek refuge because they do not believe anymore, and then being compelled to declare their belief and talk publicly about how they return to Islam and that kind of thing. And of course, those of us on the inside know the details of it and know that it's not true, but also can't say anything because you don't want to put somebody in danger. And yeah, I mean, it is a really abysmal situation, and increasingly it seems more and more that you cannot practice effective activism in those political environments. Mohammed, do you see any hope for the future for Egyptian society to possibly go back to maybe a place like we were in the mid-20th century, where atheists can openly publish about their thoughts and talk on television and write about things? Do you see a path to this? Are there active steps that we can take with NGOs, with international organizations? How do you see this going forward? Is there, I mean, I'm not talking about a master plan for changing the world here. I'm just talking about small steps that we can do as individuals to affect incremental change to bring more political and religious freedom to Egypt.
Well, I think the possibility exists that Egypt would be better in regards of ex-Muslims and freedom of expression, and more moderate in regards of Islam. However, I cannot really see any really strong trends going in this direction of moderation or freedom of expression or so. What we could be done is that I think to protect influential figures like Sharif Gaber. Sharif Gaber was really influential. I mean, there is no one that was so influential under ex-Muslims in Arabic-speaking countries like Sharif Gaber's.
How could we possibly protect Sharif Gaber?
I don't know, maybe diplomatic pressure. Maybe he should be able to go to the embassy of a country and just leave. And it happened. I just don't want to speak of personal stories of people, but I mean, I think that happened to some. Just going in the embassy, and the embassy organize everything, the person can simply leave.
Yeah, I mean, even if somebody cannot leave, there are cases of people just staying indefinitely in places like that, which is of course not ideal, but it's better than prison. Which, speaking of prison, I mean, I don't know how it is in Egypt and Saudi Arabia. I hear about political prison where you have on the one side the ISIS guys takfiring the Al Qaeda guys and them getting in fights about who's going to lead the prayer, and you have the atheists there in the middle. Holy shit! I'm gonna get killed, and I mean, even Raif Badawi had an attempt on his life in prison in this kind of environment. Who's a secular Saudi prisoner. So
the situation of Raif Badawi is really sad. I have seen his wife in a couple of conferences, and the fact that a father cannot see his children and cannot see his family, it's all of these years, his life is wasted in prison, and now he's forced to stay in Saudi Arabia. Like, come on, there is no mercy in the hearts of these people. There is no mercy in their hearts. It's really sad. I mean, yeah. Regarding Egypt, the changes that one could do is people who are influential, like Raif Badawi, like Sharif Gaber, like these people should be protected somehow. When it's bad for them in their countries, we should work on providing safe passages for them. It's not like Hercules. It's not the most difficult job in the world because it happened to other people. So it could be done. NGOs could apply pressure from the outside. For example, a country like Egypt, you cannot have NGOs really in Egypt who do much. Because they would go to prison. Can imagine also the situation is similar in Saudi Arabia. So you cannot do a lot of in the inside. So you can try to pressure from the outside using the freedom of the West, for example, to raise awareness of the situation inside these countries and try to change the mentalities of people who are there. And that would be a way to go, and to protect people who are talented, like Sharif or Raif or so. And I think the problem also is that from the outside, you start to lose touch with the society, with the pulse of the society in our countries. So I'm not in touch with Egypt the same way I used to be as I was living in Egypt. And that might make us a little bit less influential. But I've seen a lot of influencers that are not ex-Muslim influencer, but like normal Egyptian influencer who are living almost 100% in the West, so they don't visit their country, Egypt, anymore. But despite that, they have a very strong following. So it's possible. It's not that it's impossible, but it's a little bit maybe harder. Yeah, I think that would be the way from my side, from my perspective, because you cannot really do a lot on the ground. And if it's possible to do something on the ground, then for me, as somebody who is in exile, or like I don't consider Germany an exile for me. I started to consider Germany to be my home. But for somebody who are not in Egypt, you could try to finance these groups that are working on the ground and trying to influence changes. For example, in Egypt, maybe I will send you also a YouTube channel called the Almaniyun, and they host really, really interesting people that speaks in topics that are really interesting. However, they are not really famous, and it's good for them, because if they got famous, then they would be in prison too. So keeping a low profile is good. But sometimes I hear people who speak there, and they say, I am surprised that we have such smart people who could analyze things on an Islamic perspective and societal perspective in this way. They are just buried in Egypt. They are buried. They are not allowed to really speak loudly. But that these people exist gives me hope, because I didn't even know that such people exist. And these people, if it would be possible also to support them, that would be a good thing to do.
Absolutely agree. Yeah, I think, especially from this place of freedom, we should never forget about our privilege, and do our best to maintain ties to activists in our countries, and to groups that can have influence on diplomacy, on pressure, on all of that. I think your perspective has been incredibly valuable, Mohammed Nofal, and this interview or this episode has already, I think is maybe the longest conversation I've had on this show, or one of the longest. I'm going to edit it. It's going to be a bit shorter, and so I don't want to keep you for too long here, even though there are a couple of points I wanted to talk about, but I think for the sake of time, we might just leave out for now. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you think we should absolutely cover before we wrap this up, Mohammed?
I think we covered everything that was important to me, and I think to you too.
All right, Mohammed. Thank you so much for your perspective. Thank you so much for being here. It was an honor talking to you. It was a lot of fun.
The honor is mine. The honor is mine, Zach. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for this cool time. And yeah, I mean, it was a nice social time for me, because I worked the whole time, and then now I had to chat with a friend. So that's good. That's cool.
I'm happy to hear about that. Hopefully we'll see each other very soon. Thank you everybody for listening. You made it this far. Thank you so much. And follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to our podcast. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Emancipated Citizen Podcast. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram. Have a wonderful day. Have a good night. And goodbye, everyone.